Welcome to Glass in Session. I'm your host, Val. Thank you for clicking play. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for subscribing and supporting this show. This is the last episode of the season, and I'm going to need a little break. I'm recovering from COVID. That was a good time. So I will have the month of August off, but I will be reposting some episodes for you to listen to in the meantime from the back catalog. I'll be back in September with a fresh new season. But this crazy season needs to come to a close with something a little stiffer than wine, I think. Arak. Not the country, Iraq. Arak. It's from the family of anise-flavored spirits. I bring you today's tipple, this one from the Middle East, and we're going to dig into its origins, quite important as it can be traced back to the invention of the still itself. What? Almost the invention of hard liquor. Just as Iran in that area is the original land of Vitis vinifera, the original wine grape, Arak is kind of hard liquor's mothership calling us all home, which carries us swiftly into history. Don't get me wrong, the Greeks and the Romans, they tried their damnedest to up the ABV of their fermented beverages, but they failed. And their failed attempts at distilling wine or beer into something a little bit more potent probably killed a few people along the way via methanol poisoning. We've heard about that before. The Arabs, however, picked up the ball and within a few centuries scored the eventual high-proof goal. Arak, A-R-A-K, or sometimes spelled A-R-R-A-C-K, as in the Oxford Companion to Spirits and Cocktails, or quite possibly the OG, A-R-A-Q, is from the Arabic word for sweat. Yummy. Now let me clarify. Arak roughly translates to, as I mentioned, perspiration, but also essence or sap or even spirit. Because when we think of the distillation process, which I've talked about before on this podcast, and I'll link up a few episodes where I've talked about it, the condensation you see forming during distillation, one can get to, yes, Arak equals sweat equals spirit. It's that condensation of vapors, which is what we collect as the spirit. And what this also tells us, and many of you may already know this, it was indeed the Arabs who created the alembic or pot still in the 8th century. Or more precisely, Arabic chemist, or what they call a polymath, because he was very, very talented, Abu Musa Jabir ibn Hayyan, a.k.a. the father of alchemy, a.k.a. the father of chemistry, a.k.a. the creator of algebra. He was born in 729 CE in Persia, or what is today's Iran. He spent most of his time living in what is now Iraq. Remember, a large chunk of Iraq was part of the Persian Empire, which was massive for centuries, as I mentioned in the last episode on Iran's wine history. Jabir's contribution to alcohol history is a scientific milestone, yet we can turn to Muhammad ibn Zakaria al-Razi for the term alcohol, which is A-L'-K-O'-L. Alcohol, from what is derived this podcast, raison d'être, which is alcohol. Al-Razi was a vaunted physician, also a polymath and scholar of his time, but born a century after Jabir's passing. And he picked up where Jabir left off and started distilling as a practice. Jabir built the house, but Al-Razi made it a spirited haha. And what we are in here is called the Islamic Golden Age, where sometimes booze was cool and other times it wasn't. Regardless, it was also loosely a part of society, and Al-Razi is given credit for being the first, quote, true distiller, in addition to authoring a book about distillation called The Secret. Yeah, not the book The Secret you're probably all thinking of. This one is actually about booze, as well as children's books about medicine and even some extensive writings on smallpox. Through the 9th and 10th century, Al-Razi's distillation treatise made its way to Spain and Sicily, and then started spreading throughout Europe, including up Italy's bootleg. And I've talked about the oldest medical school in Western civilization, the Scuola Medica Salernitana, I believe in the Grappa episode. Around the year 1000, it was practicing distillation in the service of health to the population. But meanwhile, back in the Middle East, home distillers were using the pot stills to distill excess wine, as it would otherwise oxidize. They were also using the stills for, as I mentioned, medicinal tonics, essential oils, and perfumed waters for cooking, etc. Anise, or some say anise, started becoming more popular as a medicinal cure-all, similar to the wormwood cures I mentioned in the absinthe episode. We're talking everything from digestion to coughs like me right now. Now, as people discovered the supposed curative properties of anise, they were realizing that it tasted pretty good along the way. Thus, it's quite possible that distilling alcohol for drinking in the same still where there may have been some aniseed oil residue from essential oils, we believe this might be where the anise-flavored spirit was likely to be accidentally born. It is also believed that this flavored spirit, made intentionally for drinking now, got its name from that distillation process, the condensation or sweat drops that are collected as spirit. Over the next 200 or 300 years, the Arabs were trading their Arak, which inspired other countries to create their own versions, and we'll get to those. But by the 1200s, the Mongols were slurping some Arak during their invasions, and why not? They brought it along for the ride. There's evidence of the Chinese distilling spirits during the Ming Dynasty from the 14th to 17th centuries and adding anise to their distilling rice wine. From the 1700s to the early 1900s, the Ottomans are credited with boosting the production in the Levant areas. Even some of the wineries I talked about in the Lebanon wine episode, they make Arak and different kinds of it as they were founded during this time. So we see Arak take on the name Arak in Iran, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Afghanistan, and Georgia when referring to distilled spirits. And their version, Arak, I hope I'm saying that right. I didn't forvo it this time. Aragh. Today, Arak is considered the mother distilled spirit. Those are my words, and is how we got to so many varieties of spirits today. So let's dig a little deeper into what it is. Is it made with grapes? Yes. In Lebanon, they use Obedi or Merwa, white grape varieties I talked about in the Lebanese wine episode, where the production of Arak is essentially regulated under, no kidding, appellation guidance. Although I remember reading that it can be made with dates and prunes, they do have guidance for their pure version of Arak. Once the grapes are fermented into the base white wine, they distill it 3 times, each time concentrating the alcohol. But on that third distillation, that's when they add the anise, although some wineries will add a 4th distillation and even age their Arak in amphorae, or those clay vessels. In Palestine, local white grapes are used. I've seen Dabuki mentioned quite a bit, Dabouki. Those grapes are fermented with wild yeast. The skins are often hand-pressed, and then the base wine is distilled, adding local green aniseed. Syrian and Iraqi Araks follow the same similar approach for the most part. They ferment the grapes into a base wine, they distill multiple times, they add the anise. Grapes may change and producers may use different stills or aging times and materials, just like we see with wine. It's really the choice of the distiller to use the ingredients and tools at their disposal and what's available locally to render their desired house style. When we look at Arak around the world, we'll start in the Middle East, which is Arak's home, of course, Lebanon, Iraq, Palestine, Jordan, and Syria. And it's considered one of the simplest original spirits, as the only added flavor component is anise. Absinthe, for example, it is wormwood-based, and a number of botanicals are used to flavor it, in addition to anise, or star anise, or fennel, or the like. Similar spirits that were most likely inspired by the centuries-old Arak tradition include Turkey's raki, Greece's ouzo, Italy's sambuca, France's pastis and pernod, and of course absinthe, which is broader European, mostly with a French-Swiss history. Again, I talk about that in the episode, which is anise, wormwood. Here in America, absinthe does not have to be made with wormwood, where in Europe it does. So it's just a component. It's not what it's centered on. Then there's the Iraq Sagi, Iran's version, often classified as a grape-based moonshine. If you think it's still not made in Iran, think again. There's an underground operation for sure. I linked up an article about it and how some Iranian expats are making the stuff in New York now. To quote Siavash Karampour, I guess who used to be a big deal on Tehran's music scene and now manages a bar in Brooklyn, he says, quote, "Everybody's drinking, but we just don't want to get caught," end quote. So as far as I'm concerned, the regime can suck it because Iran be drinking, and I don't blame them. Iraq is also produced in Israel and Iraq, where it's called Iraqi, Araqi. Makes sense? There is also a linguistic similarity to Batavia Arak in Southeast Asia, made from sugarcane or palm sap or rice, rather than grapes, depending on whether it comes from India or Sri Lanka or various styles from Indonesia. Again, kind of different. Some people put it in the same category. But in my mind, I think back to the rum episode because there was a category called Bengal Arak, and it was made from black sugar believed to be the predecessor of rum. So shout out to the Mughal Empire and what would become Bengal rum. Long story short, and there are many versions of this story, Arak and like spirits appear to be that mothership calling liquor lovers home, as I mentioned earlier. So what, Val, are we doing shots? Nope. The culture around Arak is hospitality, celebrations, or feasting. So we have food, we have friends, and sure, there is the bar scene. But appetizers, or in the Middle East they call them mezze, M-E-Z-Z-E, those are the common pairings, sort of an aperitivo in Italian parlance. As for the service, the idea is to dilute the spirit with water. We don't do shots with it, similar to absinthe, because sometimes the spirit is up to 60% ABV. Now, the formula is normally 2 parts water to 1 part Arak. It's common. We sometimes do a 1-to-3 when it comes to absinthe, but 1-to-4 is also done. And what the party trick is you'll see this clear spirit become kind of cloudy and white, or they call it a louche. And that is from a compound in the anise, I believe they are anatols, reacting with the water. This, boys and girls, is why you'll also hear Arak called lion's milk. I'm going to start calling my absinthe that. But here's the thing. The spirit goes in first and then the ice cold water. If you're going to add ice, some websites have said to add the cube first and then the spirit, then the water. Otherwise, you get some kind of nasty film from just plopping the cube in. I personally haven't tried it, but ew. Arak, regardless, is a staple for many mixologists and can also be used in cocktails. And that, my friends, is bringing my voice and me to the end of this trip through time and maybe even a little something unexpected this season. I hope you learned something that you can use out there in your enjoyment of wine and spirits and travel and culture. And I thank you for riding with me this season through some bumpy terrain as we explored wine regions off the beaten paths, wine regions in war zones, yet full of character, history, and tradition. Again, I thank you for subscribing, for supporting the show. As you probably already know, if you're listening, you can find me on Apple Podcasts, Overcast, my aggregator of choice, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Good Pods, or wherever you get your podcast joy. You can always reach out to me via email. Email me at val@glassandsession or glassandsession@proton.me. On the socials, pick your poison. Blue Sky, Glass and Session. Vino with Val on Threads and Instagram. You'll see Glass and Session trademarked in my bio. I am on Spoutable, Glass and Session. On Substack, glassandsession.substack.com. On Pinterest, Vino with Val. And on Facebook, /Glass in Session when they're not kicking me off. Connect with me on LinkedIn, Valerie Caruso, DWS, CWE, FWS letters after my name, lots of wine stuff, audiobook narrator, which reminds me you can find this podcast and the latest audiobooks I've narrated on Audible. There is Glass and Session swag in my TeePublic store, linked way at the bottom of the show notes and on my website. And again, thank you for supporting this show. See you in September or on the socials. Let me know what you're finding to drink out there. Glass and Session is a production and registered trademark of Vino With Val, LLC. Music is Write Your Story by Joy Stock. Website is glassandsession.com/podcast.